Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent Playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
We're still here. We haven't gone away. We were away for a while, but we're back and hopefully back on track. We're going to talk music, specifically 1983. New pop. New pop, the order of the day. New pop.
New pop. I don't know what that means.
That's kind of a newer fangled way of talking about the new wave, second British invasion kind of music.
People call it new pop.
Well, some people do.
I've never heard that before. New pop to me is just like new pop music that just came out. I didn't know it was connected to this particular era.
Yeah, so it's new wave pop, basically. It's new pop, but drop the wave. I think when you say new wave, it kind of has a slight connotation that it was not popular or not really popular enough to make the top 40, in Billboard. That kind of, it's before alternative. It was a term used for music that college kids and alternative lifestyle people listen to, not mainstream music.
That's true. And there's a big difference between the UK mainstream music and the US mainstream music. So that doesn't always cross over.
This is true. But this is where that UK mainstream music started to become US mainstream music, helped by MTV, of course. Mm-hmm. And we started to see the beginning of, and early on, they called it the second British invasion. Of course, the first British invasion was the Beatles and all the British bands that followed in their wake in the mid-60s.
The Mersey Beat.
The Mersey Beat. At first it was mainly Northern England bands, and then London bands after that. The second British invasion was the new wave British groups that started selling records in the United States, despite record company and radio's resistance for a number of years since the punk revolution of 76, 77. The term new wave had been around in artistic circles, referring to cinema mainly. I think it was really kind of a U.S. marketing angle because punk had such a negative connotation in the United States. It was a lot more stylish and popular in England. I mean, punk bands were having hit records early on in the UK. Here, it was like this scourge to be feared, by mainstream media. So the term new wave started to be tossed around like an alternative, safer way of describing this music by younger artists, mainly coming from England. So, yeah, new wave just became this catch-all term, I think. But I still think there's this connotation that, it's an alternative music. It's not popular music. But by 82, Duran Duran breaks through.
Yeah, I mean, they're huge.
Right.
It almost seems like you don't necessarily always classify Duran Duran as new wave because they are more pop. Because pop is popular, right? Right. That's where pop music, the name, comes from. So,
and plus, there wasn't a lot of punk in their sound. It was
much more polished.
Art rock combined with disco.
The U.S. had already had disco in the top of the charts, so it wasn't as unfamiliar, I guess, to the mainstream. And that's even before MTV came along. But definitely, MTV was such a huge factor.
Yeah.
Where we are right now in 1983, it's more and more important.
And part of the reason a big reason you had this British invasion was because a lot of the video inventory that MTV had in their infancy was from British groups. The big chart show in England on national media is Top of the Pops. So if you have a hit record, you're asked to perform on Top of the Pops. Well, not everybody was able to get to the studio. They might have been on tour. Maybe they just didn't want to do it. And so people started, people were doing music. I mean, the Beatles did music videos.
Did music videos that were played on Ed Sullivan and Top of the Pops.
Yeah, after they stopped performing live, they started making these videos that could be shown on these shows so they didn't have to go and play live or mime to the songs.
It seems like there was a lot less specific music shows on TV in the US. So yeah, they were having to draw a lot from the British videos that were randomly made videos, like Rod Stewart. Rod Stewart had more videos played in the first 100 videos of MTV than any other artist.
And to his credit, I've been listening to Rod Stewart a ton over the last couple of years. And right now I'm kind of in that era, late 70s, early 80s, where he's one of those 60s artists that really comfortably adapted to the new recording styles of the day, like with the Tonight I'm Yours
Yeah.
album. Young Turks, I still have that 45. I remember buying that when it came out. It's from that album. So he very easily transitioned, whereas it was a very difficult transition for the majority of the artists from his era, which is, late 60s, early 70s when he first broke through. But yeah, he a ton of videos. So, I mean, people tend to forget what a big star that guy was. I mean, he's still pretty popular to this day. He's capitalized on the nostalgia market. He was kind of early on the bandwagon recording those albums of standards.
The crooner type stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
He's kind of revitalized his career a few different times.
Yeah. But I mean, he was big for a long time.
Yeah,
Big,
he was
really big.
huge. He was huge. I mean, even starting with the Faces and then his solo career in the 70s, but in the 80s, he was really big too. And
he's still pumping out hits in the early 80s, sure.
But, he's also been very, even though his 80s look is just like cringe now, but
well, whose isn't? Who's the least? But, who's the least cringiest?
Like the leopard pants and like the, he always had that where he seemed like he was trying to be fashionable, and like have a look. He had a look. He always had a look about him, which does translate to MTV. I mean, he had something there that, it was interesting to actually see him, where a lot of the artists from that era, they didn't have any kind of a fashion sense about them. They didn't have a look. And if they did, it wasn't anything that really could sit alongside like these new romantic bands or the new wave bands.
The funny thing about Rod Stewart too, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but he never really changed his hair all that much through all these eras. Yeah. It pretty much stayed the same.
The spiky blonde hair.
It's like it was never that fat. I mean, it was kind of, in the glam era, it was kind of a fat, what do they call the shag?
Yes.
It was kind of popular then.
No, his haircut is kind of like, it is his. Like if you see hair like that, you're like, oh yeah, that's like Rod Stewart hair. He's got Rod the Mod hair.
And you see just as many women with that hairstyle as men.
Well, he's very androgynous too. And I think that's also why he translated over into MTV that way.
I'm glad you brought that up because one of the things that's really notable about Rod Stewart, and I think people who aren't big fans of his might be surprised by this because you kind of perceive him as this really masculine, jocular
ladies man.
But he was, what we call an ally now, long before that term was thrown around. The Killing of Georgie came out, in the mid-70s?
Yeah.
Which is a story about the murder of a gay man. And it's a very, sympathetic portrayal of a friend. I mean, it's fictional. It's not a true story. But who else of his stature was doing material like that? I mean, that's pretty unique. Yeah. Plus, he had a really tight friendship with Elton John.
Yes.
He had a lot of gay friends. Plus, it was fun for him to be camp.
He's pretty flamboyant and campy.
He just enjoyed that kind of banter.
And it's his stage presence. I mean, like he's putting on a show. He's a showman. Like he really is one of those type of artists, which once again is something that I think works for MTV. Gotta love Rod the Mod.
So anyway, our 3 songs we're going to try and tackle here, none of them have much in common with Rod Stewart other than they are all British groups. The Eurythmics breakthrough hit, really their worldwide breakthrough hit, came out in early 1983, January in England, a little later on in the United States. That Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. Naked Eyes, with their cover of Burt Bacharach and Hal David's Always Something There to Remind Me. And then we're also going to talk about another very influential song that wasn't a hit in the United States. It was in England, and that's Blue Monday by New Order. Let's start with the Eurythmics. A lot in common with the Eurythmics and Naked Eyes, both duos. Both songs are almost entirely synth-based, almost entirely electronic-based. In fact, all 3 of these songs are almost exclusively electronic, synthesizers to produce all the sounds, both the melodies and the rhythms. Eurythmics, now, they were one of the most popular bands of the 80s, and this was their second album as Eurythmics, although Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox were in a band just prior called The Tourists. Different sound, The Tourists. It was pretty much straight power pop, new wave power pop.
Very 60s sounding.
Some of it,
60s
yeah.
pop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some of it. In fact, their big hit was a cover of Dusty Springfield's I Only Want to Be With You,
Mm-hmm.
which came out in late
Well, they had a
63.
lot of the Vox organ and like
Yeah.
really chimey guitars, and it's a very throwback sound to
I
me.
mean, there's nothing particularly original about the Tourists, but I like it. Everything I've heard, I've liked. You know, but they were not the main creators in that group. So Dave Stewart was
Yeah.
a guitarist, Annie Lennox was the front woman, the lead singer, but the main composer was the other guitarist, Pete Coombs, and he was somewhat troubled. I think he had substance issues. In fact, the band broke up after he OD'd on a tour of Australia.
Well, and Annie's really not the lead singer. I mean, she sings backup, she sings lead on some songs, but the other guy sings lead
Yeah, I
on
think you've
most
listened
of
to
them.
them more than I have. I've only heard a few things.
I was surprised how little she sings. Some of the stuff is kind of like X, like how John Doe and Exene
Right.
singing
Yeah.
together. They'll do that. So they'll both sing lead together. But she's definitely not the star in that band. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
It's something I'd like to delve into a little more because, like I said, I like what I've heard, but I'm a big power pop guy. It's one of my favorite types of music. So,
Yeah.
and then Naked Eyes kind of formed out of the ashes of another band as well called Neon. So the two guys in Naked Eyes, the duo there, Pete Byrne, the lead singer, and then Rob Fisher, who's responsible for a lot of the music and the programming, had been in this band Neon. And at one point in Neon's run, the band also included the Tears for Fears guys, Kurt Smith and Roland Orzabal.
Oh, yeah.
All these guys from the West Country in England, Somerset, Bath. And again, I've listened to a little bit of Neon stuff, and that's definitely worth exploring some more as well. That's some interesting music.
That I haven't listened to.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that.
And I'm just starting to kind of delve into the first Tears for Fears album too. I've really hadn't listened to that.
I actually just listened to it yesterday. I've listened to it a bit, but that's one of those albums that the singles are great. I love the 3 singles from that album. And there's like another song too. I can't remember what it is now that wasn't a single, but it's still one that I know. The rest of the stuff, it's interesting. And there's some songs that are actually really cool. And then there's some that are kind of meh. So it's an uneven album. But as their debut, I think it is really good.
Yeah, that album does have its fans. So let's get back to Eurythmics here. So Dave and Annie were in this band, The Tourist. Dave Stewart had been kicking around quite a while. He was in a group called Long Dancer. They were on Elton John's. They were kind of under his patronage on his label Rocket. They put out music in 73. And he was just kind of this long-haired hippie burnout type from Northern England, very much into the drug culture. Annie Lennox from Scotland, Aberdeen, Scotland, was kind of a musical prodigy as a youth. Got a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music, which is pretty prestigious.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got some pretty hardcore, serious music background. She was training in piano, voice, and flute at the Royal Academy of Music. Harpsichord, too, I guess, was one of her specialties. But, found the rigorous training and practice necessary to be a good classical musician not to her liking. Didn't really feel like she was up to the same standard as some of the other students there. It wasn't really her milieu, I guess. Didn't feel like she fit in. So she'd kind of been in minor bands and playing in bars and that kind of thing and working jobs to make ends meet. And that's how they met. She was waitressing and he got smitten and they started dating. They became a romantic couple. And then while they were in The Tourists, they were continued to be a romantic couple. But right after the band broke up on this tour of Australia, shortly after their romantic relationship ended, but they decided to continue on as a musical duo. So with just the two of them, and this goes both ways, Naked Eyes and Eurythmics, there's just two of us. How are we going to create enough sound to make a record? Well, we got all this new synthesizer technology that's emerging. And, it didn't really fit Dave Stewart's profile, hippie folk rock guy with long hair down below his shoulders, constantly stoned all the time. Not really the type of guy you think is going to get into electronic music. But, again, there was this, we talked about it before when we were doing Kim Wilde. Her brother had a Wasp synthesizer. It was one of the cheapest ones you could get at the time. So here in the early 80s, later 70s, synthesizers were quite expensive, not easy to obtain. But they started to drop in price pretty dramatically at this point, become more accessible. to burgeoning musicians. So they had this thing, and they realized quickly they were gonna need more gear if they were gonna put any kind of decent sounds together. So they somehow wangled a bank loan and got all of this digital equipment, not only keyboards but processors, drum machine, this early prototype drum machine computer, I guess. And if you watch the video for Sweet Dreams, a lot of it is set in an office boardroom, and it's kind of lampooning, I think, the music business. But you see Dave Stewart, he's typing on this computer, and I don't think most of us realized it wasn't like an IBM computer or some business tool. It's the actual drum machine that he's typing on in the video. If you weren't distracted by the cow walking around.
The close-up of the cow.
Right. Apparently, according to Annie, it was pissing everywhere during the shoot, which was fun. And Dave Stewart says they had to get the cow into the room they were using for the shoot. They had to put it in an elevator in this building, and he said the farmer was not real big fan of all that. Dave Stewart is a riot, by the way. Go back and watch. There's a clip of them on the Letterman show not long after they break out in the United States, and it's hysterical because she's so intense. She's fascinating to me. Annie Lennox is absolutely fascinating to me. Wonderful singer. I mean, one of the great vocalists of the era, undoubtedly, which is amazing to think that she wasn't utilized more in the Tourists,
Well, and even in their first album on In the Garden, I don't know if you've listened to that, but
a little bit.
Her vocals are very ethereal and kind of like muddled. I mean, it's nothing like what the powerhouse of Annie Lennox. And I don't know if she just hadn't quite found her voice yet. She didn't have the confidence. I don't know if they just weren't utilizing her right, but I'm not really sure what the story was there, but it sounds nothing like what most people know as Annie Lennox.
She has this incredible presence about her. She's warm, but very intense. Someone you just don't want to trifle with. And those eyes are it's incredible eyes, just piercing, just a commanding presence on stage. I mean, it's very natural performer on stage. Well, I won't say natural performer, but it appears that way.
A commanding performance on video.
Right.
I mean, Sweet Dreams is definitely one of those songs that, because of MTV, it became huge. And her presence, her look, everything about her really was just like what put them over the top.
Now, you say that, and when we get toward the end of 83, we're going to do a special about the artists and songs that got the biggest boost from MTV. I think most people would think this song would be in contention for that, but I'm not going to include it because this song, just purely based on its musical merits, I think. I remember clearly the first time hearing Sweet Dreams on the radio in the car, and it's like, stop the presses. What is this? It just grabs you immediately.
Was it a hit before it was on MTV?
Well, I can only speak from personal experience. I mean, we wouldn't have had MTV in our household at the time that it was a hit. That came later, which is kind of why I want to wait till end of 83 into 84 before I talk about the big influence of MTV, just because we didn't have it. If we were seeing videos, it was Friday night videos.
That's true. I was watching NBC. Friday night videos. Yeah.
But the song itself is just arresting. Everything about, and Dave Stewart nailed it on the head when he talked about the song. They had trouble convincing their record label that it was hit material. They said it doesn't sound like a single because there's no chorus to it. Well, no, it's the opposite. The whole thing is a chorus. He says every element of that song is a hook, and it's true. Everything about it hooks you in. The unusual drum beat on the first beat of the bar, which was a mistake when he was programming the drum machine. The interweaving synth patterns. So he was messing around with that rhythm, that synth rhythm. So they've set up their own little studio in their shabby apartment they're living in. And she is just about as down in the dumps as you can get. Their career's going nowhere. They're deeply in debt because they had to assume the debts of the Tourists. They stayed on RCA. Their first album was a flop, didn't do anything. Although there's some very interesting stuff on it. In the Garden is the name of it. They seem to have disowned it, which is unfortunate.
It sounds so much different than what they're known for. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own merits.
No, there's some really cool stuff. I mean, there's a song on there, Belinda, that sounds like a proto dream pop song. Something Lush could have covered, in the 90s. Wonderful track. I love it. Clem Burke drums on it, by the way. Rest in peace. We sadly lost him since we last went on the air, Blondie's drummer. But he drums on that first record. They did a Old Grey Whistle Test bit where they performed Belinda live, and he's pounding away on the drums behind him. A little distracting, if you ask me, a little over the top, but that was his style.
Well, it was also co-produced by Connie Plank, and
Right.
it's got the Can guys, so it's definitely has a different vibe.
Yeah. Little more European, Germanic, cold. Not as much as the soul Motown influence that Annie brought to the table. That comes later.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's a great mix of those two flavors in this song. Not together, the verses, although there's no chorus, but
Yeah.
sweet dreams, the main verse, it's pretty dark, pretty cold. And then they get to that bridge, which is very Motown influence. Hold your head up, moving on. Keep your
Yeah.
head up, moving on. And then again, hook everywhere. The little tinkling, the milk bottles. That's a hook. That's a great hook in that section. I think that's just hitting milk bottles. I don't think that's actually an electronic keyboard effect. They may have fed it into a computer, but everything about and I think the greatest aspect of this song is her backing vocals. Holy cow! This is where she's really showing her chops, and he's showing his chops as a producer, weaving that in there. I mean, it's just incredible backing vocals on this record because the main part of it is just kind of monotone, not particularly melodic, but when you get to that bridge, oh my gosh, just celestial, just wonderful. It's an incredible track. It holds up well still after all these years, and it's still getting covered all the time. Numerous covers of this. They went on to have a bunch of hit singles throughout the 80s, but I don't think anything tops this. Although I do love Belinda. I just dig that track a lot.
I think Here Comes the Rain Again comes close. I mean, that's a great song, which also was released in 83. Their debut album, Sweet Dreams, are made of this. And Touch. Sweet Dreams came out early in 83 and Touch came out the end of 83.
Right, yeah.
They're very different albums. But yes, I think that this is one of the most enduring songs from the 80s. I think it's one of the best songs. I mean, it made Annie a superstar.
Right.
For good reason.
Yeah. And this is where the video comes in too. I mean, when people got to look at her in that video, it's like, what are we seeing here? Is this a man? Is this a woman?
Yeah. She looked like Ziggy Stardust.
Yes.
It was shocking to people too, because, even just a woman with short hair was a big deal.
Right. I mean, who else?
Having it be bright orange and the androgynous look too, dressed in like a suit and in the video. So.
And just her performance in that video, there were rumors that the lyric was about S&M, and the video certainly didn't help quell those rumors. When she points that pointer at him, you're like, oh, do whatever you want to me, lady. It's like, whoa. The camera loves her. The camera loves her.
Which is why I think it was so influential for her to be seen. It really did set them apart. And I think Dave Stewart as a musician, but also, like you said, as a producer. And that's something that he started to take control of at this point, and that's where their sound changed. And like I said, I don't really know what it was that made Annie become either more confident or maybe the songwriting, or I don't know what the dynamic was there between her and Dave as far as like how that worked so that she started to come into who she was.
I think there was a perception at the time that he was like the musical brains and she was more just the front, which is not true at all. I mean, she had strong musical background with her training at the Royal Academy and classical training, and she was very, very much involved in the composition of this music. Now, his production skills obviously got him a lot of work later, most notably with Tom Petty in the mid 80s, but do not discount her role, musically in the compositions in this group.
Yeah.
This duo.
And, I think that they were pretty experimental too.
Certainly at this point, yes.
And this album.
It's a really interesting album.
I actually prefer Touch because I think that it has more songs that are accessible and also just, it's a brighter album. Aside from Here Comes the Rain Again, which is actually a very moody song, but also a beautiful song. And I think that and Sweet Dreams are their two best songs. But I think that these two albums are definitely the peak of their creative work together.
I think side one of Sweet Dreams is fantastic. Side two hasn't really sunk in for me as much.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Love is a Stranger, also a
Oh, what
great
a
song.
great, yeah. And so
Love that
that
song.
that was one of the singles they released before Sweet Dreams, and then they
Mhm.
re-released it later, and it hit the charts in the US. Very different sound, very different vocal from Annie, very much in the higher register, just showing
Yeah,
her incredible
her
range.
range. Mhm.
Um, but it's a haunting song. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then the one that really captured my attention was their version of "Wrap It Up." Now, I didn't know this was a cover to begin with. Most of
Mhm.
us are familiar with that song by Fabulous Thunderbirds,
Yeah.
but it's an old Sam and Dave track. So it dates back to Stax Records in the '60s. I didn't know this. Their version kicks ass, and there's a lot of stuff on side one of this record that sounds quite modern. I mean, it's aged very well.
Yeah, I think that there's some kind of like Eno Bowie-like sounds
Yeah.
to it. The synths kind of are reminiscent of that to me. I don't know necessarily if I'm thinking side one is better than side two because there's some songs I thought that were pretty cool on side two. This is the house. It had a funky bass line and
Yeah, it just I haven't listened to it enough for it to sink in, I guess. But side one, it grabbed me immediately. I mean, several tracks on side one were like, wow, this
I
is
think the problem is that the last two songs are very moody and kind of boring
yeah.
and don't really stand out very much. So that sort of eats up a lot of side two in a way that it's nothing that's memorable.
Yeah. I'll just say I enjoyed this record a lot more than I was expecting.
Yeah, and I'd never listened to it before. Like, this is the first time I'd really ever listened to this whole
Oh,
album.
I'd never
This
listened to a Eurythmics album.
I'd listened to Touch a
Yeah.
lot. I'd listened to Touch a lot in the like in the 80s and 90s. I don't know why it just happened to be one that I had. I think I had it on cassette, so I listened to it in the car a lot.
Yeah.
And that album is definitely more accessible, and I think the whole album is good. It's just an easier album to listen to.
Yeah.
And I just think that they're both really, really talented
Yes.
and just really interesting people too, and smart people. And I think the
Yes. Yes.
intelligence comes through in their music, but also in the fact that, and this is something that's kind of happening around this time, where you said synthesizers are getting more affordable, but they're also more attractive to people who know how to use them, know how to use a computer, like you said, Dave was using, know how to program them.
Yeah, they were producing themselves. They weren't getting any outside and he was learning on the fly. I mean, he didn't,
Yeah.
he was a guitar player, he was a hippie. He wasn't a electronic boffin.
But he had to be smart enough to figure it out,
Yeah.
though. And I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of musicians during this time and before this time, like in the 70s, like Pete Townsend, who just they couldn't even read the manuals. Often they were in Japanese or so they basically just had to figure it out themselves. And they're doing a lot of experimenting.
I think this is where Connie Planck was a big influence too. Also
Mhm.
on David Bowie is regarding this technology. And I remember a Bowie quote about synthesizers was, the least interesting thing about these electronic keyboards was the stuff that was already programmed into them. What
Yeah.
made them fascinating were the mistakes and just messing with them, what
Mhm.
kind of weird sounds you could discover that way.
Yeah.
And that was kind of Connie Planck's mantra too. It said the mistakes are always more interesting than the planned things.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how this song came about, just messing around, this offbeat rhythm. It didn't come out.
Like that bass drop on the 1 and the 3.
Yeah. That's not what he was trying to do. It came out backwards. And then he had somebody who was helping him, assisting him with the thing. He says, well, I can fix that for you. I said, no, let's
That's
leave
one
it
of
as
my favorite things about this
oh
song.
God, yes,
I
yes.
love that bass drop. Yeah.
I mean, it's not a funk song, but it's definitely on the one, It's
Mhm.
yeah. No, it's a killer song and it's held up well over the years. And I think it's one that's we like to get these songs in our playlist that transcend the generations. I think a lot of younger people like this song, recognize this song. Now, I say there's a lot of commonalities between the two songs I'm choosing. The main one for me is great vocalists, excellent
Mhm.
vocals. Annie Lennox, one of the great vocals of the era. Not as many people will know the name of Pete Byrne of Naked Eyes, but he absolutely nails the vocal on Always Something There to Remind Me. Now, your song, Blue Monday
Mhm.
by New Order,
Yeah.
considered, way hipper, more influential. This group has never done it for me, and I think it's mainly because of the vocals. Just not, you know, nobody is going to confuse Bernard Sumner with an opera
I
singer.
love Bernard's vocals. I love them. And once again, We talk about voices of distinction or
Yes.
voices that are not necessarily technically great, by any means. And Bernard Sumner is definitely one of those people, but that doesn't mean I don't love them and they don't speak to me just as much as Annie Lennox vocals do. And, to talk about New Order, you first have to mention what they were before they became New Order, which was Joy Division.
Yes. I'm desperately, embarrassingly underinformed about Joy Division's music. It's one of those bands that, for 30 years, I would say, yeah, I'm going to get around to listening to them eventually. Just never have.
Well, they had 2 extremely influential albums, Unknown Pleasures and Closer.
Yeah.
And
I know the one song that most people know.
And Love Will Tear Us Apart is their most well-known song, which actually was released after Ian Curtis, the lead singer, took his own life the night before they were supposed to go on their American tour. So the remaining members of Joy Division, Bernard Sumner on guitar, Peter Hook on bass, and Stephen Morris on drums, decided to forge on, and they changed their name to New Order. And they brought in Stephen's girlfriend, Jillian Gilbert, on synthesizers. So as New Order starts their next phase, they had a few singles that they had written with Ian and sound very much like Joy Division. And then they started changing their sound and they didn't have a lead singer. So Bernard Sumner took over vocals and, like you said, is certainly not a traditionally great vocalist. He does not have much of a range and he has a very
6 notes maybe
type vocal style, which personally I love. But one of the things I think that's really interesting about New Order, especially when you get into 1983 and Blue Monday, they were not a synth pop band. They started out as a post-punk band. And so they had drums, bass, guitar, and they're kind of more akin to what Gary Newman was doing with Two Boy Army, how he started out, with more of like a rock sound and then moved into synthesizers. Until Jillian started the band, they didn't have really a synth player. They did use synthesizers, but
I think the producer, Martin Hannett, was probably mainly responsible for those sounds.
Yeah. So after their first album, they were still kind of trying to figure out what direction they were going. And they were spending a lot of time in New York in the clubs, hearing a lot of music that was being played in these clubs, the Giorgio Moroder, Donna Summer. So that time that they spent in New York was just really influential. And when they came back from New York, Bernard and Stephen Morris started basically building their own synthesizers. Kind of in the same vein we talked about Thomas Dolby. He was really tinkering with synthesizers. They were doing that same kind of thing because they still were not affordable. They couldn't just go out and buy these expensive synthesizers. And they were definitely influenced by high energy Italian disco. They pretty much lifted that stutter drum pattern at the beginning of Blue Monday from the Donna Summer song, Our Love, from Bad Girls album, came out in 1979. And there's also this other song called Dirty Talk by Klein and MBO that is an Italian high energy disco song that lifts from that and from the Sylvester song You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, which was a disco hit. That was sort of the backing track, which Stephen Morris and Jillian sequenced on a sequencer. And, you talked about mistakes being the most interesting part of these songs, especially with synthesizers. Blue Monday is a perfect example of this. Jillian says that when she was entering all the information, she actually missed a beat in there. And so that's what kind of gives it that just like it's a little bit off and this sort of urgency about it. And so they kept it in,
Makes it more
but
unique.
It was a mistake. Yeah.
And didn't they have an issue when they tried to perform live on, was it on Top of the Pops?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Yeah.
Programming snafu?
Yes. But what I was going to say is that I think what makes this song unique and so cool is Peter Hook's bass line. He has a bass sound that sounds very much like a guitar. It's that very twangy. He plays it more like a lead guitar. There's a bass line in there that he actually took from a Ennio Morricone riff that, first of all, I think sounds so cool. And and it takes it away from a disco sound. There's a darkness about it, and it comes from that bass. And then you have Bernard's vocals, which are very robotic. Now, they're not so robotic that he's using like a vocoder like Neil Young Trans or something like that, but it's done in a very robotic style. But the lyrics have emotion behind them. Like, how does it feel to treat me like you do? Like there's something there. So there's just this combination of all these different forces coming together of the very synthesized sound mixed with real guitar and real vocals, but also still kind of bringing in that sort of non-human feeling to the vocals too. So I think all of that together just makes it really unique, even though they're drawing from actual songs and sounds that were already happening around them, and had been for years. What you just mentioned about the Top of the Pops performance, the Top of the Pops, which was the weekly show in England that had been going on forever and ever, had pretty much always been lip synced. Performers would come on and they would lip sync their performance. And part of that was because apparently the sound in the studio and the TV studio was not good for live music. But New Order insisted that they do a live performance, which I always thought was kind of strange because really most of this song is programmed.
Right.
Like the only part that really is live is the vocals and Peter Hook's guitar. But they insisted they do it live. So this is back in the day of floppy disks, which that's going to come up again in a minute. I'll reference. So Stephen Morris had these floppy disks with the sound effects. They had an emulator. They actually did have an emulator that was a very expensive piece of equipment to do the
pretty
song.
new at the time.
Yeah, to make
sampling keyboard.
The sounds of like the explosions, and like that kind of stuff within the song. And they sampled Kraftwerk song Uranium. That's what makes that ghostly sounding chorus in the background.
I never know if we're supposed to say Kraftwerk or Kraftwerk.
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 If we want to say, and the way it's supposed to be pronounced is probably Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk.
But during the performance, apparently Steven switched the floppy disks. He had them in the wrong synthesizers. And so it was all out of order and out of sequence. And you can see them when they're performing. It was a new
order.
You can tell, yeah. You can tell that they're like trying to keep from laughing because they know that it's all messed up. And the vocals do not sound good just because I think the way that the room sounds, and it's infamous as being like one of the worst performances ever done.
Pretty much a disaster.
Top of the Pops. And it also, I don't know if this is true because there's a lot of lore behind New Order, but apparently they say that that's one of the first times that the song actually went down on the charts after their Top of the Pop performance, which had really never happened before. Another thing I think is interesting too is it's a pretty boring performance. You go back and watch live video from this era, and Stephen Morris is still playing acoustic drums live. He's always been pretty much like a drum machine. I mean, he really is one of the most consistent, barely plays fills, but is just like a total driving force. And he always just kind of wanted to be a drum machine. And he says that once he discovered how to make the drum sounds on a synthesizer, he pretty much made himself obsolete as a drummer. So they started to get away from him playing an acoustic drum kit, and now it's kind of more like a Kraftwerk performance because you see him and Jillian both just standing behind keyboards pressing buttons, and that's all really that's happening. Bernard's not even in the Top of the Pops performance. He's not even playing guitar. He's just singing. And, Hooky is always like really just statuesque, just standing there with this low slung bass. And so there's really not much to look at. Blue Monday really is that transition where they moved from being a traditional rock band, with bass, drums, guitars, vocals, to a synth pop band. And that's kind of where they went from then on. Blue Monday is also the biggest selling 12-inch ever. They put it on a 12-inch because DJs were playing 12 inches in discos and it wouldn't fit on a 7-inch album. It was too long.
never on a studio album, right?
It was never on a studio album. Well, until their collection, until Substance came out in 1987.
That's not
but it
a
was
studio
released,
album. Yeah.
But yeah, it was a compilation. It was released only as a single. But, being the biggest selling 12-inch ever, this might also be lore, but it lost money because, going back to the floppy disk, one of the things about New Order that I always thought was really cool, and I think it is something that people have always been attracted to about them, is their whole, not their image, I guess, but their
design ethos. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Peter Saville, the graphic designer who was also a co-founder of their label, Factory Records. He designed their singles, their albums. The covers were always really cool, really interesting. They rarely ever had their name on it anywhere.
This is the same guy that designed almost all of the Buzzcocks, kind of modern looking.
Which are also very cool.
Yeah.
Yep. The Blue Monday single was actually designed to look like a floppy disk. And one of the things they joke about is it was so expensive to make it that they lost money on the album. But the most expensive part of it are the things that are not actually on the cover. It's the cutouts. It's the pieces that aren't there.
Right. It's a die cut sleeve.
Die cut sleeve. That's
expensive to produce.
So Blue Monday was a hit in the UK. It initially reached number 9. It went to number 3 in 88. Now you have songs that in the past maybe would have just been like a club hit, because this song pretty much is just a dance song.
Yeah.
And now you have them charting in the top 10.
Once again, disco never died.
Never died.
Never died.
And it's really a precursor to what became house music. And it started from disco. Blue Monday is one of the few songs from the discos that crossed over into the pop charts in that era.
It's just never crossed over into my heart, Sheryl. I've tried. So, I would have been oblivious to all this stuff at the time, New Order music throughout most of the 80s. And then in college, I remember my sister, who was very much a new waver in high school, where my tastes were a little more mainstream. Actually, by the midway point of high school, I was getting into classic stuff, like oldies and classic rock. And that's kind of where I wasn't listening to a lot of contemporary music. So she made me 3 tapes, I remember, early on, sophomore year of college. Prince, Sign of the Times, De La Soul's first album, 3 Feet High and Rising, and then the Substance compilation, New Order. The first 2 really opened my eyes. And I'd never disliked Prince. I'd never owned any of his records or anything. And this is the first time I'd listened to one of his albums straight through. And I'm like, wow, this guy's incredible. It's just really opened my eyes. Same thing with De La Soul. That was kind of what put me over the top. I'd already kind of dabbled in hip hop, rap music, but their take on it was so different, and so interesting to me. And then I became a big fan, at least for a while. But the New Order thing just didn't release the endorphins for me. Just kind of left me cold. And I remember I was making a compilation CD a while back, kind of based around U2 with music from 1989. And I was thinking, New Order's Technique was a big record that year, and U2 was starting to get influenced by those kind of bands.
Yeah.
And so I borrowed it from a friend just to listen to see if there's anything I wanted to put on there. And that was a popular record in 1989. That New Order Technique
but I'm not
record.
into that New Order.
Yeah, a lot of people love it, and a lot of big New Order fans are not too keen on it. But I lump it in with all the rest. I just feel the same way about it. Just blah.
No, their first 4 albums, amazing. And really, I think that Bernard Sumner, to me, he has the vocals. Like, how we talked about Bono and how he sings right at the edge, of his range. Yeah. And there's that's what he's like to me. Like, he pushes it right to the edge. Not that his edge is very far, but he does. And he has that urgency about his voice. And there's a vulnerability in there too. I feel like there's a lot of emotion in there, but it's more it's passionate, but in a dispassionate sort of way. And I love that. I love his guitar. He's got that chukka guitar that goes through everything. I love Peter Hook's bass. It's very, like I said, he has a very lead style to.
Speaking of Peter Hook, there's another commonality. Beards. I mean, how unusual was it to come out of this new wave?
He didn't look like a new wave guy at all. No. He even had a ponytail for a while.
Dave Stewart. The beard, he had a Van Dyke going.
And he had a ponytail too.
I mean, beards were verboten. I mean, nobody had beards in the new wave scene back then. I was just not at all fashionable. But again, Eurythmics were pretty unique. They were older. They'd been kicking around a lot longer than most of these people.
Well, and I mean, I think, like I was saying too, with New Order, they'd been around for a while too, and they were a band that was not a synth pop band. Like Naked Eyes, or like these bands that really were just using synthesizers. They were really a post-punk band that started using synthesizers.
Well, speaking of Naked Eyes, we'll close it out there. So they're a duo like Eurythmics, two men, Pete Burns and Rob Fisher from the West Country in England, which is kind of pastoral, scenic. I think they came from comfortable backgrounds. Don't really know a whole lot about these guys' biographies, but presuming they're middle class or upper middle class families they came from, and university educated guys, pretty classy. They'd been in other bands separate and together when they came together to form this group Neon that had the Tears for Fears guys in it. And when that kind of unraveled, they decided they were going to focus more on songwriting and just work as a duo. But then they started producing music with synthesizers and started to realize they could make their own records pretty easily with the technology. The album they put out, Burning Bridges, it's self-composed for the most part, but then you've got this one cover, and they wanted to do this Burt Bacharach song that had been a hit in the 60s in England.
More than once.
Well, Sandy Shaw had the big hit.
Yeah.
Dusty Springfield covered it as well around the same time. The original demo of the song was cut by Dionne Warwick, who is the vocalist for Bacharach and David's songs. And I listened to a bunch of versions of Always Something There to Remind Me Today. You know, the Sandy Shaw version, the original hit version in the U.S., which wasn't a big hit, didn't make the top 40, but Lou Johnson was a soul singer. And then I listened to, there's a clip on YouTube. It's Dionne Warwick, not the demo version of this song, but it's a live TV performance. I don't think it's actually live. If it is, my God, is she amazing. She is an incredible singer, but wonderful lip sync job, if it is a lip sync job. But it appears like it's one of those situations where, like Top of the Pops or other TV shows, where they pre-record it in advance and then lip sync to the new recording. I'm guessing that's what this is. Although it could be live. I don't know. Maybe they had a really good overhead mic. And she does it as a medley with One Less Bell to Answer, another Bacharach David song. It is, knockout, stunning performance. Just incredible. And she's really incredible. She's just so effortless. So effortless. Just incredibly talented singer. And she was the muse for Bacharach and David. She got all their best material. Why she didn't get this song, I'm not sure. But they had her demo it for Lou Johnson. But then his version wasn't a hit. They had the hit in England, a couple of versions. I think there was probably a few more versions before Naked Eyes decided to tackle it. And these guys really knew it from the Sandy Shaw version because that was big in England. Everybody would have heard it. But Burt Bacharach himself, once he heard their version, said, "This may be my favorite version of one of my songs by anybody," which is high praise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two elements as to why that is. First, the production is immaculate. And it's pretty much all synthesizers, but cutting edge stuff at this point. Now they're working with a guy, Tony Mansfield, who is really adept with the new synth technology. And he's using a Fairlight, which is fairly new at this time. It's another keyboard with sampling capabilities.
It's probably most connected to Trevor Horn.
Right. And then Peter Gabriel was very early on the Fairlight bandwagon. It was super expensive. Again, you got to think these guys are from comfortable backgrounds because this kind of gear is still very pricey at this point in time. But the vocal is immaculate. And then especially when you come to learn, when they got together as a songwriting combo, started producing these demos, pretty sophisticated demos using these high quality keyboard technology, and they started shopping around. They got record label interest right away. And they signed with EMI. And one of the caveats for them signing with EMI is they said, "We want to record at Abbey Road, like the Beatles. So we'll sign with you if you promise we can record at Abbey Road Studio." And it just so happened when they were recording their album, Paul McCartney was working on his solo album at the time. And they had a party at the studio, and they got to hobnob with McCartney and some other, well-known artists. And that night, they went back in the studio, and Pete Burns said, "Why don't we tackle this song? I really want to record this."
He was feeling inspired.
Yes. And it's been said that it was a one-take vocal. That's not the truth, but they knocked it out that night in short order. And it is pretty much, it's just him. There's not a lot of sweetening. There's no harmony voices on this. There's no overdubbing. It's just his vocal, and he kills it. He absolutely kills it. Just a wonderful vocal performance. And it's surprising to me that this guy didn't have more of a career because he really is a fine singer. But the music track is outstanding as well. And there's two elements that really grab your attention. One is the drums, and I think they're Simmons pads, which is another early use of that.
Yeah.
Brum-ba-dum, da-da-da-dum, ba-dum, brum-ba-bum. I mean, they're synthesized drums. And then those bell sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Da da
Da,
da
da,
da
da,
da da da
da,
da
da,
da
da,
da
da,
da da.
da, da,
It
da.
sounds, I mean, that riff, that melodic line, it sounds like a church bell pattern that would signal a call to service. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's reminiscent of that. And I think that's probably what inspired them to put the bell sounds on there, which I think are, I don't know if they're actual bells or tubular bells or synth sounds, but that's an incredible hook on
Yeah.
this song. And this actually was a hit in the USA before, and it never was a big hit in England. It
Mm-mm.
didn't really chart in England until they'd had a hit here, and it made the top 10. I'm not sure when exactly it was released. Right, that it was somewhere in the Netherlands at the end of
It was
'82.
initially released in 82 in the
Yeah,
UK.
but it didn't do anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then released in the US probably early '80. I'm guessing January of '83, and it started climbing the charts by the spring, and by June it was a top 10 hit. Sweet Dreams actually was later on. That really peaked in the fall of '83. Wasn't released until April in the US, although it was a January release in the UK. But yeah, I mean, just again, hooks, hooks, hooks. The drums, the bells, incredible vocal performance. And, it's a Burt Bacharach. And if you don't know much about Burt Bacharach, I mean, as a younger person, I wouldn't have been interested. It's like
Old people
older
music.
people music,
Yeah.
soft rock. But his songs are so musically sophisticated and
Mm-hmm.
so challenging to sing because you really have to have a ton of range and dexterity to handle all the changes in his songs, which, again, Dionne Warwick, it's just effortless.
Yeah. To me, what makes this song is the vocals, because I
Yes.
honestly find the drum fills a little bit annoying after a while because there's just so many of them. And it's that dated
Yeah.
Simmons drum
It is
sound.
a dated sound, but for me, in that context, it just works. And at the time, it would have sounded really unique.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an unusual sound.
I don't mind it. It's just that it's like continuous throughout the song. Like there's just so many drum fills throughout the whole song. It just keeps going and going. So it's a little bit much, but it doesn't take away from it. I still think it's a great song. And actually, I didn't know about Sandy Shaw. I knew who she was. I'd heard her name. I didn't realize this was the song that she had a number one hit with. But I did learn that she actually, at that time, had a resurgence because of the Smiths.
Right. Yes.
And they were like just so enamored with her. And their first single came out in 1983, Hand in Glove. Didn't really do much on the charts, but they reached out to her and she covered that song with everyone but Morrissey as the backing band. And her version made it into the top 40 in the UK top 40. So she was on top of the pops with them backing her. And she ended up recording 3 other songs of theirs. And they're really cool. They sound great. And I just think it's kind of a neat little footnote that I didn't know about.
We're going to leave it out there. Now, one of the themes for me of doing this show is the world of pop music reopening to me that I've kind of shunned as a later teen and 20-year-old plus, really more focused on rock and then hip hop.
Yeah.
Getting back and rediscovering the incredible pop music of my lifetime, like the Eurythmics, I mean, it's just great stuff. Now, I've tried with New Order, and I do plan on giving the Smiths a shot here. I know we're going to be talking about the Smiths more down the road. For me, they've been a one-hit wonder, and I'm pretty sure that song's going to be on the playlist. So that's going to come up pretty quick. I think that came out in '84, I want to say.
Mm-hmm. I think you'll be more open to the Smiths.
I think so.
Because they're more melodic, and they definitely have more of a 60s throwback.
And I like Morrissey's solo stuff, at least some of his early albums. Yeah. I like his early solo albums.
I love the Smiths. Yeah.
But I've always lumped the Smiths, The Cure, New Order, Depeche Mode, lump all those together. It's just never been my thing.
Love all of them.
But I'm going to give it a fair shake. So when we proceed with our next episode of 1983, we're not going to be talking synth pop as much, although there was a lot of technology involved in this heavy rock song that was from the breakthrough album of a band that would become massively popular in the USA and elsewhere. We're going to talk about Def Leppard when we next convene and the burgeoning glam metal sound, among other things.
See, and that's something I have to open myself up to a little more because I really haven't listened too much.
never been my big scene, but of course, we are children of the 80s, and our peers loved this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
When we were in high school. So,
and it has nostalgic value for me,
yeah.
for sure. But I am interested in delving deeper. And that's one of the things I love about doing this podcast.
Yes.
Music that at the time I wasn't into and I just kind of glossed over, or I just never really gave, much of a listen. And now I can go back and do that now.
Def Leppard's another group that's a one-hit wonder for me. And we're going to talk about that one hit when we get back together, and some other things that we'll figure out between now and then. But again, our songs added to the playlist today, all synth pop classics. Sweet Dreams are made of this by the Eurythmics. The Eurythmics? Just Eurythmics, right? Is it the Eurythmics?
I think just
Eurythmics. Just Eurythmics. Yeah. Always Something There to Remind Me by The Naked... No, it's just Naked Eyes. And Blue Monday by New Order. Until the next time we get together, I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
And this is Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent Playlist. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Take care.